All right. Hello, everyone. As educators in the health professions, I think we're all driven by the same big question. How do we make sure our students can actually do what we teach them? Move that knowledge from the textbook to the bedside. Today, we're going to build a really practical guide for doing just that, focusing on one of the most powerful tools we have, the Objective Structured Clinical Examination, or OSCE. So, let's start with a picture we all probably recognize. On the one hand, you have the traditional oral exam, the Viva. And look, we've all been on both sides of that table. They can be great, but it can also be incredibly subjective, right? The questions change, the examiner's having a good or bad day. It's just not standardized. But on the other hand, you have the OSCE, and the entire philosophy here is the complete opposite. It's built from the ground up to be objective, to be standardized, and to be fair to every single student who walks through the door.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. We'll kick things off with the why, the problem that the OSCE was designed to solve. Then we'll get into the framework itself. From there, we'll dive deep into the nuts and bolts, how you actually design one of these, how to run the circuit smoothly, and then we'll finish with the absolutely crucial piece, scoring and standardization.
Okay, so first up, the problem and the solution. Why did we need something like the OSCE in the first place? Well, it's all about moving beyond that subjectivity, because when the stakes are as high as they are in healthcare, we just can't afford to have inconsistency in how we assess competence.
And that leads us directly to the solution, the OCSE. At its heart, it's pretty simple. Candidates move through a series of time stations in a circuit, performing tasks in a simulated environment. But the two key words, the ones that make all the difference, are objective and structured. This means every student gets the same scenario, the same amount of time, and is graded against the very same criteria. It's our best defense against bias.
And you can see how these core principles all lock together to create a powerful assessment. You've got objectivity and standardization, which we just talked about. The stations are time-limited, which tests efficiency. It's a simulated environment so we can control all the variables. But the big one, the real game changer, is that it's performance-based. We stop asking what students know, and we start watching what they can do.
Okay, so we've got the principles down, but what does that mean in practice? What can you actually measure with this framework? This is where it gets really exciting, because the answer is a lot.
So, seriously, what kinds of skills are we talking about here? It goes so much further than just checking if someone memorized a fact from a lecture. Well, for starters, you can assess those hands-on technical skills. Think about it. A station for suturing, a station for properly taking blood pressure, or one for performing a focused physical exam. You get to see their technique, their dexterity, their whole process right there in front of you.
But it's also an unbelievably good tool for measuring communication skills, those skills that can be so hard to assess otherwise. You can create a station where a student has to take a complicated history, or counsel a patient, or maybe even handle a really tough conversation like breaking bad news. And you do this using standardized patients, actors who are trained to give every single student the exact same prompts and reactions. It's brilliant.
And it's not just about what they can do with their hands or their words. You can also test their interpretation skills. You can have a station with an ECG, a lab report, an MRI, and the task isn't just to spot the abnormality. The task is to interpret it in a clinical context. It gives you a direct window into their clinical reasoning process.
And just a quick but really important point of clarification here. We've been saying OSPE, which is for the clinical sciences, but this same model works beautifully for the basic sciences, where it's called an OSPE, Objective Structured Practical Examination. This is perfect for things like a histology station, an anatomy practical, or a physiology experiment. Same principles, just a different context.
Okay, let's switch gears and get really practical. Let's talk about design. Because a truly great OSCE doesn't just happen by accident. It requires some serious, careful planning, and we can think about that in 3 distinct phases.
Think of it like a project plan. You've got the before the exam phase, which is where all the heavy lifting happens, the blueprinting, the station writing, the examiner training. Then you have the on-the-day phase, which is all about logistics and execution, and this is the part people sometimes forget. You have the after the exam phase, where you analyze the data and review how it all went.
So let's zoom in on the fundamental building block of the whole thing, a single station. Creating one solid station follows a pretty clear 5-step recipe. You have to start with a very clear objective. Then, you list everything you need. You write the task for the candidate, and it has to be unambiguous. You do the same for the examiner instructions. And then you design the scoring sheet to perfectly match that original objective.
Now, how do you make sure your whole exam is balanced? That's where blueprinting comes in. This is, without a doubt, one of the most important steps.
A blueprint is basically a grid that maps out your stations against the content areas and the skills you need to test. It's what ensures you're assessing a broad sample, a little bit of cardiology, a little respiratory, some history taking, some procedures. It stops you from accidentally testing the same thing over and over.
All right, our blueprint is solid, our stations are written. Let's talk about the day of the exam, running the circuit. A good OSCE is more than just a collection of tasks. It's a carefully designed experience with a mix of different station types.
A healthy circuit usually has a good mix. You'll have your observed stations, where an examiner is watching a student perform a task. Then you have interactive stations, usually the ones with standardized patients. You'll also have unobserved stations, maybe where a student has to write notes or interpret an X-ray alone. And then you have the rest stations. And please, do not underestimate the power of the rest station. It is not wasted time. It's a critical part of the design. It gives students a moment to decompress, to shake off a bad performance in the last station, and to mentally prepare for what's coming next. It's an essential tool for managing the huge cognitive load of these exams.
Okay, we've designed it, we've run it. We now come to the part that really determines the validity of the whole exercise, scoring and standardization. How do we make sure our measurements are fair, reliable, and consistent?
We've got a few tools in our toolbox for scoring. The simplest is a checklist. Did they do it? Yes or no. It's great for straightforward, critical safety steps. Then you can use a weighted scoring sheet, which lets you assign more points to more important actions. And finally, you can use a rating scale, maybe from 1 to 5, which is great for assessing the quality of a performance, not just its completion.
And this quote just hits the nail on the head. Your scoring has to reflect what's actually important clinically. If you give a ton of points for things like smiled at the patient, but only 1 point for identifying a life-threatening condition, your assessment is broken. A student could literally pass the station just by being polite. That's why weighting your points correctly is absolutely everything.
But listen, even the most perfect checklist in the world is useless without this final step. Training your examiners is completely 100% non-negotiable. You have to get them all in a room before the exam. They need to watch videos, practice scoring, and argue about it until everyone is on the same page. This calibration is what ensures that a 4 from one examiner means the same thing as a 4 from another. It is the bedrock of standardization.
So, to wrap this all up, if you take one thing away, let it be this. The whole point of the OSCE, its entire reason for being, is to shift our focus in assessment. We move away from just asking, what does this student know? And we start asking the much more important question, what can this student actually do?
And that really leaves us with the big question we should all be asking ourselves. We can design and score a technically perfect exam, but how do we make sure it's actually testing the skills that matter? How do we ensure it's preparing our students for the messy, unpredictable, real world of clinical practice? That's our challenge as educators. Thanks so much for joining me today.